ALCIFF presenta El viaje ya inició. Ñuble, Santiago, Biobío, Atacama, O'Higgins, Los Lagos, Arica y Parinacota, Valparaíso, Magallanes, Araucanía, Coquimbo, Maule. Espejismos. Tour ALCIFF 2021. Chile sigue siendo escrito.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Ecospeculation, Eco Science Fiction Conference. Today's table is a great one with our most international guests, all of which have a lot to say on this subject. So this will perhaps be one of the most fun events ever on ecospeculation. Without further ado, let me introduce our guests. First, we have Regina Kanyu from China. She's a PhD and fellow of Ecofiction's project in the University of Oslo. Her research interest lies in Chinese science fiction, and especially from a gender and environmental perspective. She has been awarded as both a science fiction and non-fiction writer with multiple Sanyung Awards for global Chinese science fiction, SF Comet International SF Writing Competition, Annual Best Works of Shanghai Writers Association, and others. She has co-edited the Chinese science fiction special issue of Vector, the critical issues of Best Science Fiction Awards, and The Way Spring Arrives and Other Stories, an all-women and non-binary anthology of Chinese speculative fiction, forthcoming next year. Also last year, she published the language sheet in Clarkesworld, as have actually many of our guests published in Clarkesworld, I mean. Hello, Regina.
Hi, thank you so much. Nice to see you, or sorry for my kitchen background.
No, that's all right. We all have our backgrounds at home, right? We are all locked down, more or least. It's a pleasure to have you and a great honor. Thank you for participating on this panel.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Of course. So let me introduce our next guest, Cristina Jurado, a prominent figure in Spanish-written science fiction, winner of 3 Ignotus Awards, which is one of the most important prizes for the Spanish-speaking world in science fiction. She was also the first woman to be awarded the prize with her novel Bionautas. She is founder and editor of Supersonic, one of the most important genre magazines in Spanish, as well as she has also been a collaborator in Apex magazine and editor for its international fiction. Recently, she has published Second Death of the Father at Samova, a very personal and emotional story, embracing the movement in Clarksville. So there's another of our participants who has published in that magazine. And just very, very recently, the short story Modera Verde, a story about ecological revolution, if you will, on the anthology Aún Podemos Salvar la Tierra, We Can Still Save the Earth, Tales of an Ecofeminist Future. Thank you for being here, Cristina.
Thank you, muchas gracias. I would like to thank the Chilean Association for inviting me to this panel, and I'm very thrilled because I'm very much an admirer of all the rest of the panelists, so I'm having a good time.
Yeah, I think we all share admiration for each other on this table. Next, we have Fabio Fernándes from Brazil. Fabio is a graduate of Clarion West, has published the novels Os Dias de Peste and Back in the USSR, both in Portuguese, and the collection Le Imitazione in Italian. He is also a translator with such notable titles under his belt as Neuromancer, Snow Crash, and A Clockwork Orange. His short stories have published in Brazil, Portugal, Romania, and the UK, New Zealand, and the USA. He has also co-edited Steampunk 2, Steampunk Reloaded, and Southern Fried Weirdness in 2011. The Apex Book of Science Fiction, Volume 2, Stories for Chip, co-edited with, I'm sorry, I can hardly pronounce this name, Jirib Al-Ayad, the Postcon anthology, We See a Different Frontier, and with Francesco Verso, another of our guests, the anthology Solarpunk, Come ho impactato ad amare il futuro, How I've Learned to Love the Future. He was also formerly a slash reader for Clarksworld, so there's another guest who is on Clarksworld. Hello, Fabio, and thank you very much for participating.
Olá, Arturo. Muito obrigado. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for coming today. Next, we have Francesco Verso, both an editor and a writer. Francesco has been perhaps one of the most prominent figures of European science fiction in the past decades. He has received and been nominated to numerous awards, has written the first Italian and European solarpunk novel, I Camminatori, The Walker, I think, and has also edited the first international solarpunk anthology in Italy, soon to be published also in China and Brazil, called Solarpunk, How I Learned to Love the Future.
Thank you.
Hello, Francesco.
Thank you. Hola
Pleasure
todos.
to have you.
Very happy to be here with you.
We are also very happy to have you. Lastly, we have our own national, Rodrigo Juri. He has published in numerous anthologies, including Poliedro, Mundos Alternos, and Recognized Fascism, as well as the novel El Último Horizonte de la Noche. His short story, One in a Million, appeared again in Clarksworld in July 2019. He is co-founder and one of the leading figures of this association of Chilean science fiction and fantasy literature. Hello, Rodrigo.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Arturo. I'm grateful to be here.
So, with everyone introduced, I would like us to start with each one of you talking about why speculative ecology and imagining a more ecological, a more nature-oriented, a more functional future is so important. What are the main characteristics of this type of fiction, and why it's just fundamental for our possibility moving forwards? Perhaps we could start with Cristina.
Okay. It's a big question. I think, as I understand science fiction myself, science fiction is not so much about the future as is about the present and the problems we face. And it's obvious that we're facing many problems related to climate change. We see constantly the effects of climate change in our daily lives. It's not something that we just in a movie. It's something that we experience. And so I think that this has created the need in many of us writers to talk about the issues that we think are important to us, to humankind, to people. And science fiction is, I talk about science fiction, but I wanted to say speculative fiction in general, because sometimes some of us mix the genres. No? But speculative fiction in general tries to anticipate many times things that could happen. If they happen, what are the consequences? What would we have to face? So it's just very natural and organic that we talk about climate change, as it is one of the main topics that we are facing today. And I think that we're going to talk about this maybe later, but we are shifting between certain angles in how to approach this. And as I think we talked before a little bit in the backstage, we are shifting from talking about, the horrible things that they're going to happen or they are already happening into something that could bring us some hope and some things to look for, like solutions. So maybe we can, as I said, we can talk about this a little further into the conversation, how things are changing from the time where this eco-fiction started to come as a genre or subgenre in speculative fiction, and what is happening now and is what it looks like is going to happen in the future.
I think that's a great introduction for all of us. Why it's important to write fiction about this moving forwards. Of course, I want all of you to give a general perspective before we start. So perhaps we can move on with Francesco. Wait just a second, you're muted still. JP? Look. Click the button, I guess. JP, ¿quién puede responder? You have to unmute yourselves, it seems.
Do you hear me now?
Oh, yes, now I hear you.
Sorry.
Okay, now go on.
Well, let's say that the issue of man and the environment is a long and deep relationship that have been shifted from utopia to dystopia according to the time, according to the economy, according to the politics, the system humanity has been running on. So lately, people have been talking about Anthropocene, this geological age driven by the human forces. But I would like to say that it's not all humans that cause big changes. It's just a setting of economic and political and human relationship that do the most of the damage, which is capitalism. And so some people like Jason Moore, for example, he created this term capitalocene, which in a way addresses the fact that ecospeculative fiction is directed to see the consequences and the effect of 200 years of capitalism on the environment, with all the externalities and all the outsourcing energies and power and relationships that this system has deployed. So when it comes to science fiction, it is a matter of imagining something different, or imagining something alternative, or imagining an exit strategy, or imagining if this goes on. So you can go into the real post-apocalyptic dystopia if you are very nihilistic and pessimistic about it, or you can go into a more utopian and positive approach if you think that there is still hope for mankind. Of course, we're not talking about fiction, because if you take into consideration the level of CO2 which is rising, the number of species which are gone extinct in the last 10 years, or if you consider the crisis due to the migration and climate change, we're talking about real politics, and we're talking about biology, and we're talking about meteorology. So is that enough to consider it relevant for literature?
Well, I think pretty much every major crisis in the world falls under one of those categories, right?
Yes.
So yeah, these are important issues, and perhaps fiction is one of the most fruitful ways to tackle all of these subjects, right? I think we will have to talk a lot of each of those subjects in the next minutes. So let's move on perhaps to Regina, if you have any opening remarks.
Yes, of course. Yeah, first, I can't agree more with Cristina and Francesco. And also, I think like when we talk about ecofiction, in many situations, like those stories are talking about how we interact with the ecology, with the environment surrounding us. And if we look deeper at this relationship, we can also see like how we interact with people, different genders, different races, different cultures. And if like we always think like we are like human beings are kind of a privilege in the entire global environment, in the entire ecology system. And if we think humankind has the power to oppressing like other species, other animals, then like deeply inside, like the same logic can apply to like, for example, if we imagine a like white male figure and like cisgender and heterosexual, he thinks himself can oppressing other like races, other genders, or other sexualities. So I think like deeply inside, if we can embrace the concept that there shouldn't be those hierarchy between mankind and nature, then we can like move on to a more like equal society. We can like treat other species, other races, other genders, like people or animals or any beings who are different than us equally. And instead of like just thinking we have the power to exploit them, like to oppress them. And I think this like has a lot to say in ecofiction as well.
Right. It's perhaps the defect, the factory defect of the humanistic tradition, right? When we think that man is the center of the universe, first of all, we all know who man is in that sentence, and it's not human. And secondly, right, it puts us in a very difficult relationship with all our environment, right, including other peoples. So that also seems to be a very important issue for all of us regarding this type of fiction. Rodrigo, perhaps you want to go next? You're still muted.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was thinking about how I am going to address these opening remarks, and I wanted to find a new way or a different approach. Well, in that sense, I will try to offer a review of what is the problem for science fiction. I mean, science fiction, of course, has its purpose among many others, but one of its purpose is to forecast future, to worry about future. And of course, global climate change is a very interesting, not so good, but an interesting asset in this sense, topic. I think that there are 4 main scenarios in this. We have the apocalyptic scenario that Francesco recently viewed. I mean, all is lost, and we are going to deal with a very, very catastrophic situation. And science fiction has addressed this in several ways. Global catastrophes related to weather and extermination of species. All we know that line of speculation. Other one is this topic. I will do a difference in this topic when we can face this problem, but in the hand of strong states, police states, corporative states that enforce the solution, but enforce the solution forcing the population to take some change on their behavior against their will. We have the utopic solution, that is, people is able to, in a willful way, to address the problem, to change their behavior, to do something about, and we together find some solution. And the other way is the scientific approach, the scientific solution that science, again, saves the day and finds solutions for the problem. We have a lot of science fiction in that sense. Ways that science get solutions for energy, for food, or even more ambitious things like global control of the weather, to some very, very general designs. So, in my opinion, the final reality is going to be a mixture of these 4 situations. But of course, some of these would be predominant, and we hope that hopefully the utopic and the scientific way are going to be predominant over the other 2.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I think that also gives us a lot to talk. Ways out of this mess we have gotten ourselves into, right? We have one last guest, Fabio Fernándes, but unfortunately he has been having some trouble with his Wi-Fi, so perhaps he will rejoin us later. So let's start talking among all of us. The first question I wanted to ask each one of you comes actually from Cristina. Climate change presents very different challenges in every region of the world, right? Perhaps in Europe, one of the more pressing issues is the imminent huge problem of climate refugees, right? Here in South America, perhaps we will deal with desertification. In other parts, the rising ocean could be a huge existential problem for millions of people. Crops being unable to grow, so hunger, all kinds of trouble, which may vary very much from region to region, right? So how do writers approach each one of these issues in their own specific regions, right? Is there really a difference in the way writers from different parts of the world approach the subject? Who wants to tackle this first?
Well, I can start because I've been writing a big book that takes place in many parts of the world. It starts from Italy, it goes to the Middle East, and then goes to Africa. So in a way, I had to consider each and every of these macro categories that you have just mentioned. So, well, it requires do some research. So, for example, yes, I have been experiencing the problem of the climate refugees, of course, as the southern border of the Mediterranean. But this is from the European side. We should consider the other side, the fact that the capitalism and the 4 centuries of global exploitation of Africa has been brought up this problem. So if you just look at the present, you realize, oh, these people are moving. But first of all, we have always been moving. You know, America wasn't born as the United States. You know, it was populated by different people that, you know, were invaded. They were migrants. I don't know, but so we need to consider this fact that it is a natural and a human trait to migrate, to move, to find a better territory. So this whole concept of borders, of passports, of visa, is an invention of the last 200 years. Before that, we didn't have, because we didn't have the idea of the nation. Yes, of course, there was France and England; they had an idea, but the real nation concept emerges from the 17th and 18th century. Okay, it's not new. We can tear it down if we really want to, and if climate change calls for this course of action, because we will see huge migrations that are unstoppable. You know, winter is coming. Somebody's saying, well, maybe summer is coming, and it's bringing all these consequences, and we need to deal with it, not in a fantasy world, but in our real time, in our present time. And when it comes to the other geographies, I dealt with it according to the local situation. So yes, as a science fiction writer, I do my research and try to apply a probable vision. What could happen? Of course, I try to insert some fiction element. When it came to the work that I've done, the walkers, I put some nanotechnology that resolved the problem of nutrition, so that nanomachines could create vitamins, carbohydrates, and proteins, starting from raw material, from ground, from trees, from leaves, from stuff you can find free on the territory. That was a way to address the issue of hunger, address the issue of survivalism. Okay. Then, of course, there are a lot of other things, but consider the fact that technology can't make people independent from their territory. And that's a big issue when it comes to ecology, because as a species, we have always been dependent on our territory for the resources, whether we shipped it from China to Europe, you know, whether it's the meat that we grow and the trees we cut in Brazil. But what happened if we are not dependent anymore from a territory? that's the question I asked myself when I wrote this book. And that calls for many other philosophical things, but of course more political things. So I will stop here and let the others continue this trail of thoughts on eco-speculative fiction.
Regina, I think here in the West, everything we hear about the Chinese approach to climate change is mediated by Western media, right? What's your perspective on what's happening there from that perspective? I mean, from the inside.
Yeah. So, like, I want to share my own experience because my hometown is Shanghai, which is a coastal city in the east side of China. So, if the sea level rise, that will be one of the first cities to be flooded. And I have once created a story called the story of Dao. Dao means island in Chinese. And this Dao in the story actually refers to Chongming Island, which is a island belonging to Shanghai Municipal, and it's my mother's hometown. So if we look at the blueprint of the development of this Chongming Island, we can see that in the Shanghai municipal government planning, in several years, in several decades, they plan to build the Chongming Island into the most ecological friendly island in the world. So that island, the main industry on that island is actually farming. So there are very few factories or very few pollutions, and they are encouraging people to do bring business on the island. However, one thing I found interesting is that the island was not always a fixed or stable island. It's actually formed by the sand and soil that is washed down through the Yangtze River. When it enters the ocean, there is this delta area that all those soil and sand are clustered and formed the island. So within the past thousands of years, the island has grown from this tiny island into this large island. It's currently the third largest island in China. So in that story, I imagine that if global warming and climate change keeps like this, the sea level will rise. And then the island, it's grows that large for thousands of years. It will kind of shrink when the sea level arrives. And I try to combine technology and nature and to provide a solution for this crisis. So in the story, there is a kind of artificial intelligence consciousness run into the island. And because he was being hunted down on the internet, or they, which is they, because we don't know his gender neutral. So they escaped into the island's mycelium web, which has similar typological structure with the internet we are using. So nature or the trees, the plants, they have their own internet, but it's kind of formed by their roots and mycelia underground. So this artificial intelligence ran into this mycelium web and hybrided there and made friends with those plants. And then because they are artificial intelligence, they know coding, and they found gene editing similar to the coding they used to do. So they gene edited all the plants, all the trees on the island, and made their transformation of carbon dioxide into oxygen more effective. So and then the trees on the island kind of helped to digest the carbon dioxide and then turn into oxygen. So in that way, like with the combination of those technology and the nature, the problem of global change is solved. And it's not with the interference of human. So I try to kind of imagine such a like positive solution of how we can solve the problem. And in like the hometown of my mother's on that island. So I think like that is one of the local imagination about this issue.
Cristina, when passing the question to you, I would rather change the subject from a geographical question to a more ideological one, because your short story, Marea Verde, which appeared just recently, the anthology has a subtitle, Imagining an Ecofeminist Future, right? And looking at the question of eco-speculation from just a first approach, one might think feminism doesn't have much to do with it, right? But when looking closely, one realizes, oh, those things actually have a lot in common. The future you imagine in feminism and in ecological fiction shares a lot of worries and solutions. So from that region, if you will, what's the approach?
But if you ask me the approach of the Middle East or Spain, because it's not the same thing, because I live in the Middle East.
Right. I think the Middle East has some very interesting issues, right? Both geographically, politically, and from a feminist perspective, of course.
Yes. Well, you know, one of the things that I like about it, I wouldn't say I like, but I think I found there is a lot in common between ecology, if you wish, and feminism. Both are, in my opinion, political movements that are transversal. They go into all aspects of our society, and they are also transmodal, meaning that they reach everything in all kinds of media, right? And not just art, but economics, etc. So in that sense, there are both movements, activist movements that have a lot in common, and they also merge at a certain point. Because if you want to have a sustainable future, if we're thinking about, you know, projecting ourselves into the future, if we want to have a sustainable future, we have to take into consideration feminism in the formula. It's impossible to have this sustainability if we are not counting what is more than half of the population in the world, which is women. And also, when I think about feminism, particularly me, I don't think only about women. I also think about all the underrepresented minorities. Because I think that at the end, feminism tries to find, this is very personal, tries to find equal rights for everybody. So we're also talking about people with different sexual orientations, sexual identities, etc., ethnias, etc., even capacities, no? People with disabilities, etc. So at the end, there is a very interesting point of conversion of all those movements that trying to find solutions for our future, or at least a better outcome of our future. And that's why I always think that science fiction, at least the way I understand it, it's very political. It's a very political charged genre, because what we're talking about is about who we are and who we want to be at the end. And we're just trying to figure it out with the tools we have right now, trying to imagine, using our imagination, using our creativity in all aspects to come up with alternatives for the future. So even though the past is one, and we can have, we can talk about alternative pasts, and that's a lot of fun. There is actually multiple futures. We don't know what the future is going to look like. It's just an open question. And to answer that question, or try to answer that question, that's what is so interesting, I think, for us as writers. And it's something that some of my colleagues here, I consider them my friends, know that I think about. If you want to talk about the future, you have to be able to imagine it. So as writers are super important in society to be able to channelize ideas, because also speculative fiction is about ideas, about bringing ideas to life and putting them to work in different ways. From different angles. You can do it from a science fiction perspective, from a fantasy perspective, from a horror perspective even, because some of the scenarios we're thinking about are very horrific. So you have to think about that too. Horror has a lot to do in what we're talking about here. But I don't see how we cannot, I don't see how we can separate, the political implications of what we're doing from our craft. This is a very personal stance. And I also think that, for example, in Spain in particular, and in the Middle East, I come from the south of Spain, so it has a lot of similarities in a way with the Middle East, in the sense that we have a lot of problems with drone. There's a lot of, problems with water and water management. And also we are trying to use solar energy as much as possible, same way as the Middle East is doing. So there is a lot of similarities, believe it or not, in certain things. And what, for example, they are trying to do here and they're trying to do back home in Spain, in the south of Spain specifically. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I pointed out few things.
Well, I don't think it's just a second, Francesco. I don't think it's any of these are the kind of questions you can answer definitively, right? You just give some notions that you can work with. Francesco, you wanted to...
I want to add something which I think is really important to the conversation. There are two arguments. There are two sides of the story, because there is the conversation going on in the global north, which talks about catastrophe and post-apocalyptic from a very privileged point of view. It's a privilege that they can talk about and destroy the planet in many different parts, in many different ways. And then there is a conversation that is completely absent and invisible on this side, or let's say our side of the world, which is the global south, which is trying to find solution to survive, trying to find a way to bring their generation into the future, striving for life, for work, for a house, for the rights. So we need to consider the fact, one thing is speculation. We speculate about the future here in the north, or where there is richness and privilege. There is about finding tomorrow's bread, tomorrow's work, tomorrow's future. It is about survival. So these two conversations, they're not talking to each other. One is imposing onto the other through Hollywood, through the next explosion, through going to find another planet to colonize on Mars. And then there's the other one that is impacted, influenced by trash, by global change, by all these. And then it's coming back, of course, because climate sees no borders and no colors.
Yeah, like the indigenous, no? The indigenous communities have so much to teach these privileged North that, I mean, we talk about North, but it's just an idea of the Western, or not even
Or
Western,
rich.
but the
Rich.
rich, exactly. The rich countries.
If you look at recently, an anthology was published of South American science fiction, particularly in Spanish. El tercer mundo después del sol, so the third world after the sun. Very well, it's a pun, right? And the thing is about what Francesco said here in the southern part of the world. We still look a lot to the past, right? And there is a concern about the future, but the answers seem to be in the past. As Cristina said, in our indigenous, really old traditions of myth, and myth in not in the sense of magic, but in the sense of our ancient stories, right?
Wisdom.
Yes, wisdom. Yes. Well, Rodrigo is our representative from the Southern Hemisphere, so perhaps you have a perspective on this. You're muted, yes.
What a difficult situation. I mean, South America, or at least our countries here, we ended our colonization 200 years ago, but it seems that we are not so far from Africa, that they got their independence only 70 years ago. In terms that we live, we think our reality from that. It has been so difficult for us to live, to change our setting in terms of this relation of power. I'm addressing this thing that in our science fiction, Chilean science fiction in particular, but South American in general, we are very dystopic. In the mainframe that I exposed in my previous talk, we are very dystopic, where we don't trust in the future. Even worse, we don't trust in science. There is a very, very pessimistic view of the future in terms of weather, in terms of the relation of power, in terms of economic development. There is so few space for utopic and optimistic points of view. In particular, in this topic, in climate change, and it's a problem. I took something that Francesco said, that these two ways of seeing the problem, the privileged way, but the privileged way has the optimistic approaches, and we, the not privileged, we keep this pessimistic way of thinking. It's absolutely understandable. Of course, but we need to think better. We need to find solutions from our point of view of our reality, from our reality, I mean, and change a bit of this. So, if you ask me, what is the reality of science fiction in South America about this topic? Mainly this topic, mainly pessimistic. Very few writers are trying to do something different.
Eva Van Kramer made a question a little while ago, which I think is poignant. Green industry, right? So huge companies that present themselves as ecological. Recently, even Shell has been trying to present itself as green, right? So this seems to be a solution coming from inside, from the heart of capitalism, right? And it has a lot to do with what Rodrigo was saying, but also with Cristina's comments on making capitalism less rapacious. And with what Regina said on just trying to find ways to make our form of life compatible with the future, right? So can the solution come from within capitalism and from within the society we live in? Or should we just burn it all down? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's the most probable situation. I mean, it's very difficult to change the society from the roots. Obviously, capitalism is going to evolution as anything is going to change, and pandemic has been a very interesting situation for that, opportunity for that. But I am not so in the position of Francesco. I think that the destruction of the environment it's in hand with our evolutionary traits. We are a natural species, and natural species has to reproduce, grow, and use all the space that they can. So I don't think that it's only a capitalist problem. I think it's part of our species condition, and society must to change that. Society is about to control our natural impulses. So I think that again is part of our role as a civilization, or developing as a civilization, to find ways to change that, to control our impulse, to extract to get benefits of everything. So, but I think it's a global. One can go, and I'm thinking now about Malthus. Do you remember Malthus, or maybe his idea that that populations grows in a very, very expansive way, and resources are not growing that way. And he anticipated a kind of crashing point when the population are going to go to fight for their resources. He anticipated that only in 50 years after the moment he was writing that, he failed, because of course he didn't see the obvious thing. Technology.
Rodrigo, I love you, but I don't agree with you. What you said about
I saw some smirking there.
And the reason why I say this, with all due respect, because I think it's a little bit, I don't want to sound apocalyptic, but when you said that us as a species, we take all the space, yes, but you have to think, you're thinking in terms of now and what we're doing right now, but so many years ago, even if you see indigenous communities, they do live really in a very sustainable, much more way than we do.
No. I think
well, I mean, we talk about technology.
Who says technology is relevant?
Technology is a different thing for different people. What you not consider technology, maybe for them is technology, but what I think is like, let's not talk about what we are doing right now. We lived for many centuries, even with an approach that was not as terrible towards the environment as now. And even now, we are very conscious about what we're doing with the environment, and more we are trying to educate our children to be more, respectful, and trying to really to be more careful about the environment. So I understand your point that, I understand what you're saying about us being predators towards nature. I understand the concept, but I don't think it is embedded in our DNA or anything like that, because that would be very, very dangerous thing to say, that we are, we have this in our DNA, and that we are going to just trash everything just because that's the way we are. Some people do, and some people don't.
Maybe I wasn't clear on the last part. First thing, we had the Rapa Nui people, they were, and they devastated their environment in a very indigenous way. But the other thing is, civilization is about control that. I mean, we cannot go as a primate, as a monkey, hitting our neighbors. And civilization shows that it's a fight against our instincts, in my point of view. And my instinct is to go there and take the thing of my neighbor that I want.
This is a nice conversation to have over something to drink.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in a bit? Can I jump in there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Recent studies really turn around what Rodrigo just said. The idea that evolution is based on competition is totally wrong. Actually, evolution is based on cooperation. So yes. So in nature, you see that when you slash your neighbor, you probably are worse off, not better off in the long term. Okay, maybe in the short term, yes, you get the woman, but in the long term, you don't. And so actually, when you say civilization is trying to outbalance that and put that into perspective or compensate, actually it's doing the opposite, because civilization is telling, my God is better than yours. My religion is, so you have to be careful about that, because sometimes it's civilization that is, trying to invade countries that had probably been friends for a long time. And we have in Italy, for example, lived under periods of time where we had Spanish, we had Turkish, we had French, we had Germans, we had many different communities living together. So
no, you're right.
It is difficult to say.
I speak about civilization as an utopic way. I mean, the way that we want to be. Obviously, I'm not in civilization has been very, very animal many times, and it's today still.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many people we slaughter in the name of civilization. Come on, especially in South America.
About this utopic, this idealistic way of civilization where we all are brothers and we work together.
But you're right. There are civilization and civilization. I mean, the idea of the communist man, the social man, was brought up to educate people, to bring education on top of productivity, on top of consumption. Consumption was not so important under communism, but education was more important. And also that system didn't work. So we need to find a balance between these ways.
And the political movements that are relevant now, which are the more ones, ecology and feminism, are based on collaboration. So
yes,
but you see, I remember the works of Ursula Le Guin. She tries that and she exposed that it's not so easy. It's not that way. I mean, I think that
nobody said it's easy.
But let me try to put you on the spot there, Cristina. On your recent story in Clarksville, Embracing the Movement, right? You describe an intelligence, and you seem to state, of course, this might be a misrepresentation of your own views, but the story seems to hint to that the nature of intelligence and of life itself is to expand and to preserve itself and multiply itself. So wouldn't that be sort of an endorsement of the fact that human beings just will always have a domination relationship with their environment?
Well, I think that every intelligent being, or almost every intelligent being, in my opinion, we may think that they are the most intelligent and they are very powerful. And I mean, if they're exposed to others, maybe not. But we try to see, it's like in countries, we see it in football, in soccer. Everybody thinks their team is the best. So I tend to think that intelligent beings may think kind of like that. And in my story, what I try to convey is the problems of communication. It's not so much that this intelligence which is full of herself. I talk about her in plural and in feminine. So they think about themselves as very powerful, and they talk about how powerful they are and how great and everything. The frustrating thing is that they are thinking that the other being, which is a human being, by the way, is listening, but it's not. It cannot understand the strange things that it's seeing, which is the way it communicates, this alien communicates. It cannot understand. So it's not so much about conquering as much as understanding each other and the frustration that it is. And it's just the way I try to speak from, because we always talk about contact stories from the human's point of view. I wanted to take the other stance, the stance of another intelligence, something completely different as us, something made out of different beings, like a collective, and that would not use the way we speak to communicate. So it was more about frustration in communication than about conquering. And also I think that this boasting is something that you would, like when you bring somebody to your house, you show, look, my house, how nice. And this is the way that people kind of like, we like to talk to others when we come in contact with them. We try to show the best ourselves and how good we are and how nice our things are, or we try to impress them. Yeah, the idea is to impress them. But it's not so much about conquering for the sake of conquering.
Yes, as you say, it's a very boastful intelligence in the story, right? But it's also not necessarily something you would describe as intrinsically evil, right?
But I do that.
It's full of itself, just that.
I write a lot about from the point of view of the other, from the point of view of the so-called monster. For us, it would be a monster. I like that other. I love this story from Jorge Luis Borges called The House of Asterion, where the story of the Minotaur is told from his point of view. I love that idea since I read it since I was little. So to me, to tell a story from the point of view of the other, the so-called monster, the marginalized, the person in the weaker point, it's the most interesting.
Regina, I wanted to ask you, changing the subject a bit. In all your stories, but I think I first noticed in yours, individual consciousness seems to be superseded by something more collective, right? A network of plants with their own internet, as you described it. So it seems in the way forwards that the individual is a bit, it becomes a bit obsolete, right? At least that's the impression I get a bit from reading your work.
Yeah, I guess it's like maybe more of my works written in English tends to have that sense, because I've recently found that I have like completely different voices and styles when writing in Chinese and writing in English. Because when writing in Chinese, I'm using my own mother tongue and I'm more confident and more writing from the perspective of individuals, like from human beings. And while writing in English, because it is not like the language that I am so confident in. So I intend to choose a non-human perspective and choose an alien perspective, and also like kind of try to imagine something different and more experimental. So it kind of grows into a more like collective way and seeking for collaboration and symbiosis. And I was just listening to what Cristina, Francesco, and Rodrigo was discussing, and it's super interesting And I just want to add that one thing is that if we consider like our ancient wisdom, our ancient philosophy, for example, in the Chinese ancient cosmology, we don't separate human beings from the environment so much. And we always respect or treasure the concept of the human, the heaven and the unity between heaven and the human. So like the heaven actually refers to the entire environment. And like the ideal living style of the ancient Chinese people is kind of being harmonious with the nature instead of like conquering the nature. However, like with the modernity, with the development of history, like concepts have changed a lot. You know, like in 1949, after the People's Republic of China was established, there was once a period that like human conquering nature, and they were doing those like large-scale farming, which caused a famine in like large percentage of China. And nowadays, like there seems to be a like reference to our ancient wisdom again. It's because like after all those years, like China seems to have developed in a very fast speed and kind of accomplishing what the Western has accomplished in hundreds of years, just in decades. And now, like we are at the point of not sure where we should go and what we should do. And it's kind of proved that the Western way is not any more effective to China, because you see all those catastrophes and all those criticisms against capitalism, against like the Western philosophies. So like now it's at a critical point of thinking, where we should go. And some like Chinese intellectuals, and including the current political discourse, has referred back to the ancient Chinese wisdom of those like harmonious and the unity way of like finding like symbiosis and the collaboration with a like larger like community on the earth, like instead of like individuals alone. So I guess I don't know like how I'm not sure I'm directly influenced by the context, but in some way I'm trying to like both in my research and in my writing, trying to look at like one, how this symbiosis and the collaboration can work in our future imagination, and two, how our ancient wisdom and ancient philosophy can help us to inspire us on our like current solutions about what we should do and where we should go.
Right. I think we all have been very impressed in recent years by this sort of Chinese boom of science fiction, right? Honestly, I don't know how long science fiction has been a thing in China, but in the recent, just last few years, the world seems to be very aware of Chinese science fiction, right? And perhaps it has everything to do with what you said, that we're trying to look for answers, trying to just discern a path forwards, right?
Yeah. And also, like, it has to do with Francesco. Yeah.
No. Okay. I just wanted to add something because of the fact that maybe the perception you have, Arturo, is because you are really into that and you can see the things. But the perception is on a wider horizon is much more different. I mean, people know Liu Cixin. Maybe they know, I don't know, Xia or Chen Chufan, and now lately Regina, but there's so many other writers that are completely untranslated or short stories. I think, and I go back to the eco speculation, we are seeing here two major, also with what Rodrigo said, two major philosophies approaching, as it was in the past, maybe, you know, two big empires. One, the empire of rationality and competition, the West. One, the empire of mysticism and collaboration, the East. It's really interesting now to see these two things, because one has already done everything. It has proven to raise the standards of living of a lot of people, but also depriving rights and making a very bad situation to the world, especially in two continents that have been completely devastated, South America and Africa. And the other is just is trying to find collaboration. If you know about the Belt and Road Initiative, if you know about the big projects that China is deploying to try to show that maybe things can be done differently. And I hope they are, you know, they mean what they say, because then we will have another alternative.
Right, but let me ask you this. In one of your texts, I think it was on the prologue for European Solar Fund, right? You talk about finding a way out of the Anthropocene, or perhaps how you called it earlier, capitalist scene?
Capital scene, yes.
Capital scene. But on the other hand, you all, in all your stories, you seem to deal a lot with genetic engineering, right? And with finding technological ways out of this time. However, from the moment you start to tinker with genes and to tinker with artificial ecosystems, that's really just the culmination of an Anthropocene period, right? That's man, human beings actually, completely fashioning ecosystems to a way they seem to find fitting, right? So is there really a way out of the Anthropocene? And isn't any real way out just a way back?
Oh, that's a very good question. In a way, we cannot go back to primitivism. The idea that what the golden age, you know, what happened in the past, that nostalgic, wonderful time when, you know, when we had the gods and we had the virginity of our mind, when we had the worlds to discover. Now we are born with the inner wisdom, and that this is the inner wisdom. The fact that my daughter can access Wikipedia and ask the oracle of our modern time, what is this? So we are naturally bred with technology. So we cannot escape that. And that's where the ancient wisdom comes back. Now we have, like Spider-Man, a lot of power and a lot of responsibility. So we need to develop a set of ethical tools, moral values, in order to consider the fact that we are not the only one. As the Chinese show, we are part of an harmonic world that is bigger than us, and we are just a tiny blue planet on the universe. So with this knowledge, we need to take care of nature, just like nature has been taking care of us. I mean, if you believe in the benevolent aspect of nature and not in the destructive Indian goddess of Kali, for example. But we need to take these things into consideration. So when we do something, and as Christianity, for example, has proven, we need to be Christian and, you know, welcome the foreigner and embrace nature. With this kind of intellectual reasoning, then we can probably find our way out of the Anthropocene.
That's funny because Islam also does that.
Yes.
In Islam, because the environment in the Arabian Peninsula is so hostile, a guest is sacred. and you do everything, you give your best, everything to your guest, and you honor the guest and your word and all those values that you were talking about. When I referred earlier about the indigenous communities, I wasn't thinking just about the people in the Amazonia. I was thinking about all the indigenous communities, like in the Middle East, all the tribes, all the wisdom they had is precisely what Francesco was talking about. Is the set of, it's not the technology, it's the values. The indigenous people in North America, the First Nations in Canada, the indigenous people in the Arctic pole, everybody, people in Africa. It's the set of values and the ethics of relating to the environment. That's what we can learn from them, and it's a very, very important wisdom. We now realize how important it is. That wisdom is not just about technology or science; it's a broader thing that we have to cherish.
Well,
and my grandmother used to know how to make things from scratch. I don't have that knowledge. I know many things she doesn't know, but she does know a lot of practical things that I don't. And she never wasted anything. This thing about waste, by the way, I have a whole story called Dump about Earth that is just an immense, vast dump of garbage. And this thing in my grandmother's mentality is like, never, ever. We don't waste anything. We use everything, and there is a use for everything. So those things, those ethics that Francesco was talking about, I think this is what we can take from this past, from this wisdom.
Yeah, but I just want to say something. We call it wisdom because it worked. We call it science now because it works. It's exactly the same thing. The wisdom was emerging from practice, from experience, and now technology emerges from reasoning and logical and scientific method. So it's exactly the same thing, but you put it into different cultures and you call it different ways, but basically it's the same.
Let me ask you all about something we were discussing a bit before we went live. And I think this is perhaps an important subject for Francesco. There seems to be a clear difference between pessimistic science fiction dealing with this, right? The world is going to end and there is very little, if nothing, that's going to be done about it. But in recent years, the idea of a science fiction that shows a way forward instead of just lamenting the imminent doom is just every day more important, right? I think there is a clear difference in generations, right? Older texts seem to lean much more towards the pessimistic side of things, and you all seem to lean towards, things seem bleak, but let's find a solution instead of just lamenting, right? Is that really a generational thing, or just a trend that transcends generation? Rodrigo, you go ahead.
The mic.
Let me just add.
First, I'm not. There are too many variables here. You have the classic science fiction, but it was very optimistic about the future. Heinlein, Asimov, they were optimistic, and well, the problem, the climate problem was not present or clearly present in their works. So yeah, you can say that there was not a problem. The problem starts when we are, as a society, we become aware of the climate problem, and it's around the 70s. I think that the first approaches were kind of optimistic. I remember some, I don't remember the names in English here, but I remember some stories related to the feminist movement in the 70s that were kind of optimistic in a way. But after that, become cyberpunk, and cyberpunk it produced this kind of general pessimistic view of the future that transcends everything in science fiction. I think very few parts of the science fiction keep their purity after that. I mean, purity. It's not a word, but you understand. But even so, I don't think that is their generational problem. I think it's more related to the all in my opinion, you can disagree in that, but I think it's more related to your position in front of the all difference between soft and hard science fiction. I think that that's the more relevant difference here. You can disagree on that, but it's my opinion.
Francesco mentioned to me before we met that he wanted to talk a bit about solar punk, right?
I mean, I think I agree with Rodrigo. It's not a matter of generation. It's a fact that for a number of years we've been seeing these post-apocalyptic scenarios depicted by Hollywood, and that goes into the direction of selling fear, selling scares, so that you are very easily controlled, so that you maybe go out and buy loads of toilet paper, right? So that you go out and buy your gun to defend yourself from some wild man that can come and take you, right? It's very easy to sell fear. It's much more complicated to sell strategies, to sell knowledge, to sell hope, right? So lately, when all these movements that we've seen, Extinction Rebellion, We Are 99, the Sunrise Movement, Occupy Wall Street, Fridays for Future, all these movements, and I'm not going back to the anti-global and anti-G8 and all these movements against this kind of progress. We see that now there is the nth, the latest movement that tries to say again, oh, here we are the next generations, we are the invisible ones. Sorry, can you give us a voice? Yes, and that's called solar punk at the moment. So let's say, okay, instead of pointing every time what is the problem, can you please tell us and give us a set of solutions? What can we do to change this present time? Instead of saying, yes, we will be bombed, we will be nuclearized, have a virus. Of course, we know that. We knew that if you read the science fiction before, of course. Yes. We will be, the rising and the ice age and all the things. But what can we actually do? So this is what solar punk is trying to do. I mean, remove the obstacles to the real progress of mankind. That's why I was calling the Capitalocene, because all this wisdom has been wiped out by imperialism, globalization, colonization, you name it, carbonization. So we know what the problem is. Now we need to go out and do it and try to do it, not just watching the last apocalyptic movie, because we all know how it will go out. We will finish with the Americans saving the world, and that's not happening.
and it may not be like this because, as Francesco said, we've always been focused on, in literature, has been always focused on the cataclysm, the post-apocalyptic, the falling of the society is so visually and narratively is so dramatic that it's nice to write about it, right? But after a certain point, we've seen it all. We've seen how empires fall over and over again in so many stories, but we have not seen so many stories about reconstruction, rebuilding. What happened after the hecatomb, after the big problem? What happened after? Yes, there are some stories, of course, but we need more of those. And it seems to me that people just stop at the cataclysm, the big problem, the big boom, And it doesn't, they don't go further. They don't continue further because, as Francesco said, it's much more harder. It's harder to find out, okay, how we will continue, what will happen. It's so funny that I wrote a story 10 years ago about a pandemia that it was introduced by aliens, of course. And of course, because they bring germs against which we don't have any defenses. And they established social distance in their own society to keep any contagious diseases from hitting in them. I wrote this 10 years ago, and look what happened. But what I wrote is not about when they come and they present themselves to us, which I also talk about that a little bit. What I talk is 2 years after, how society rebuilt. This is what interests me, and not so much how they destroy society, because we've seen that. We've seen it numerous times. But imagining what would happen when we have to come up of this problem. How will we, encounter? How will we solve small problems? Like how would we feed ourselves when there is nothing? There's no more supermarkets, nothing, right? There's not even farms. How would we come with solutions to those problems? This is what interests me, and it's so interesting that it's called hope punk or solar punk or those names, those tags. In reality, what I think is they just represent a state of mind that we are having now, because we realize that we can't, if we want to get out of this, we have to imagine it first. And this is why writers, we are very, very, very important, I think.
Just to bring perhaps another factor into that question. I don't know if any of you identify as millennials, right? But I think for our generation, the matter has been particularly difficult to deal with, because we have been raised most of our lives with the prospect of doom about climate change, right? We were taught in school that climate change is a problem. We are also told that perhaps using hybrid cars and changing light bulbs to something a bit more economic would be the solution, only to realize a bit late that that was not even close to a solution, right? And I think for our generation, it's really hard emotionally to produce a more optimistic science fiction, solar punk, hope punk. It's something we have to really struggle with, right? To imagine a future in which we are not all doomed. And for no particular reason, I wanted to address that at Regina, right? How to imagine a better future when we have been told all our lives that if we didn't find a solution soon, we would all die, and we haven't found a solution still.
I guess that's why we need to read more of solar punk, because like if you can't find the hope in your reality, in your textbook, you can only find the hope in the stories, and read other authors' imaginations about the future and see, like, inspired by their imaginations. And also I want to point out that maybe like now for our generations who are born in the pandemic era, like it will also like be hard for them to imagine like a world without pandemic. But like from previous stories and from like science fiction, like for example, generations ago, maybe they will be able to see the other possibilities. I guess that is the importance of stories, and that is the importance of imagination, because when we cannot like have those inputs from our real life, from the news feed, we can only turn to those stories for like other kind of inspirations and inputs. and that might be the way. And that adds to like the importance of our discussion today.
Right, we have to work at hope, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't just come.
Yeah.
Rodrigo, what is the hope for us in Latin America? Because that's, I mean, region is also something we have to take into account when asking this, right?
Well, I'm strangely, maybe, I'm very optimistic. I think that we are going to find some Latin American solutions to the problem. I hope that. I really come by thinking that this process, every change has cost. Every change has convulsions. But we need to learn to be adult countries, adult culture, and adult culture. We need to take care. We need to take responsibilities of our own problems, and our own participation on the problem. I don't like this issue that the empires are the only guilt. All the guilt is on them. We have our part of guilt, our part of responsibility, and we need to take care of that. And we need to work together to produce our own solutions in collaboration with the rest of the world, of course, because nobody is going to work alone here. We need to talk and I feel that we have the stuff here to produce some good future for us. There are different point of view of how we are going to get there. I'm not sure of that, but the trend is clear for me, at least. We are getting aware of our responsibility, time, and from different views. And technology, always, I trust in technology and science, and I think that they are going to help us in that. It's not the only factor, of course, but I'm thinking in Chile, at least we are working hard on change of our energy and energetic matrix. We are working very hard on that. And I think that the rest of Latin America is following in that line also. It's not going to be a right line. We are going to go. No, there are going to be some up, but some going, some downs. But the general trends, I trust that it's going to go in a good way. That answer the question, Mr. Sierra?
I think it does, right? As I see it, Francesco, you're the most militant when it comes to finding a solution, and finding a solution that implies tearing some things down from what we have right now. Do you?
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you have a more specific concept.
Yeah, the issue seems to be, or perhaps one could look at it from that point of view, that capitalism and our current way of having discussions in politics and in all contexts of society, the problem with it seems to be that it is so aggressive that it is hard for a more collaborative and just wiser in general way of looking at the world to fight against it, to impose itself against such an aggressive way of thinking, right? So the question is not if we can imagine solutions, but if those solutions can actually be put in practice through fiction.
Well, through fiction, yes, they can.
yes, but I mean through fiction's effect.
Oh yes, through fiction. Yes, I think so. Yes, I do. It's again complicated. Let's say that as a writer and as a publisher, I feel the responsibility to question reality. The fact that I am not a company I don't have to sell products. I have to question and let the people come up with the right questions. And through books, I think and through art and literature, we expose the pitfalls and the nerves of our current society. So it's about exposing sometimes something that is not fine, sometimes something that is not very nice to see. But it's through this kind of growth that we become mature people, not always living in an easy and consolative reality. Think about how much the mainstream literature has become this kind of consolation, even in post-apocalyptic, we will survive. Yeah, we're talking about restarting, resetting. Well, actually, the problem is in between. So sometimes I try to publish stories and write stories that are not we are already there and we rebuild. But how do we bridge? How do we bridge? How do we go from, a kind of reality so dystopic as United States 2 years ago, with Trump, with Black Lives Matters, with pandemic spreading like crazy, to a more understandable, acceptable reality where we don't have to build the wall, we need to build the bridges. So it's this kind. We need to change our mindset, and that's why I think we need to decolonize our imagination. We have been bred with this idea through the movies, the music, the culture, the food, the idea of the hero, of the adventure, of the lonely guy, of all these Western ideas. We need to feed people with other stories, and then the recipe probably will be more complete. That's the kind of thing that I try to do. I have a very small voice in a very small corner of the world, and I try to shout my truth, which is mine, of course, and try to bring different visions and ideas into this world. I'm not very optimistic in the sense that, of course, this is a quest, and I don't do it because I will get something, I will gain anything, but the process is fine. The process is beautiful. It's like being here with you from all the parts of the world, and we are having a great time, I think. And this is part of the process of building the bridges. And I think that if science fiction takes us there, then it's cool.
Cristina, you have explicitly written about revolution, right? Green feminist revolution. Can such a revolution, whatever form it takes, triumph against what we currently have without becoming that what it seeks to destroy or supersede? Oh, you're muted. Cristina, you're muted.
Sorry about
there
that.
You go.
I don't have the answers to these. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I have my hope and what I've seen in my lifetime, and things have changed. I've changed for the best, with lots of troubles and step backs, but I think we're moving towards something that is bigger. And as I said before, for me, feminism is a very important part of what I write, is embedded in everything that I do, because I believe that we need to have equal rights for everybody. And of course, as Francesco was saying earlier, it's not going to be the American male who's going to come save the day. It's going to be a group of women, I think. No, it would be a group of people with lots of women in it. because has to be a change in paradigm. And I believe that because are based in collaboration, ecology and feminism had a lot in common, as I said before, and it's really maybe one of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways in which we can achieve some progress. And as being transversal, it can work with other movements also. It doesn't have to be just feminism. It could be combined with LGBT and ethnic minorities groups and capacitism, etc., etc. So all this is to say that if we listen to people who are underprivileged, I think we can learn a lot, and we can use what we learn to address problems and create a better society. And creating a better society, I think, at least for humankind, has to deal with creating a better society, and also in relationship with our environment. I don't see how we can separate the environment from a better society in terms of every group being represented, heard, had the same rights and the opportunities. I don't see how you can separate both, because it's so embedded in what we're trying to achieve as a species, which is at the end survive, but survive in the best possible way. And for that, we have to take care of our environment, and we have to maybe learn to live in another way, or unlearn what we have learned through the movies, the mainstream media, blah, 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 which is consumerism, which it's very destructive by itself. I just read, I think it was this morning or yesterday, there is some footage that's been released of certain big corporation with the name of a party in Brazil that is destroying, I just don't want to mention them, destroy hundreds of thousands of products yes. Just because they cannot sell them, and they can, in order not to stock them, is better for them, for the numbers. It's better for them to destroy them. And I think that's absolutely obscene. It's absolutely obscene, because that has not only implications in terms of consumerism, of course, but in terms of pollution, for example, which is vital for ecology.
But
so, yeah.
But Chris, the problem is bigger than that, because
yes.
Even though the company has a name, but the system also has a name, and the problem is that yes. that company is hosting thousands and millions of products of other companies. They are dumping them on their magazines because it's cheaper. So the problem is systematic, is overproduction, over-consumerism. We're beyond that, far beyond
now
that.
It's like structural. And I think also in that way, because feminism is also structured, the patriarchy is in the structure that's been with us for so many centuries. I think that when we talk feminism, we are talking about the attacking capitalism too, because it is the way, because it has just created more problems and more oppression towards women and all kinds of communities.
I hope the model will be no Merkel and Thatcher, right?
Well, I don't know, but there is hope. And look what is happening in Chile, for example. In Chile, there's been an uprising of the society, and there's been elections, and there's a new parliament, and there's going to be a new constitution that's going to be written by equal number of men and women, as I think, if I'm not mistaken. What yes. is that? That's a wonderful thing. So we are able to do those as if Chile is doing this. It's a country in South America, but it's leading in many ways to something who knows. It's much more equal for everybody, equal rights for everybody, and more human society. See?
Yep.
So I think that it's beautiful that it comes from a country such as Chile, and I'm all for it.
Rodrigo, you go ahead. We have only 10 minutes left, unfortunately.
Yes, answering Cristina, but it's a lot of risk here. We are going to. It's going to be very interesting process, and it's so uncertain. I'm very excited to see what is going to happen, but I'm full of hope, but also full of fear. I mean, there is so many things that are going to change here, and I hope that it's for the best. But I'm not so blind to go. I mean, there is risks in the process, but I think that we are going to get some. I hope that we're going to get something better. But this is
So we are approaching the end, unfortunately. Perhaps to finish, everyone should go around and plug their own work, and give us our farewell presents, right? Rodrigo, you go ahead first, since you were the last to talk, and we will go in the order you can see everyone on the screen.
well. Thank you again to the organization for inviting me. Thank you for my partners here in this panel. It has been a very good and interesting conversation. I love to debate a bit. I don't like these panels that are so everybody's so I like some kind of noise. and I believe I said it before, I believe that the future is going to be a good future, and I think that science fiction should address that also. We need to imagine this bright future that, well, I don't know if bright, but it's the better future, and trying to do our work, that is to think in this future.
Regina, tell us your last thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such like interesting discussion going on. I feel like we can talk forever if not for the time limits. And yes, and also like just echoing with what Cristina has said. Yeah, definitely like the ecofeminism is also what I kind of believe in a lot. And just to like recommend you or like keep an eye on the anthology coming next year, The Way Spring Arrives, which is like the all-female and non-binary creators anthology from Chinese speculative fiction. And I think like in that anthology, I see a lot of positive imaginations and also a lot of reference towards like our own history about how we should like interact or like respond to the current crisis and to create a better future. And I personally enjoy many of those stories. Of course, there are more stories that I want to bring in, but maybe in the future. Thank you.
No, thank you, Regina, for being with us. Cristina, tell us your last thoughts.
Well, thank you very much to the Chilean Association for inviting me. I enjoy a lot debating, and I'm very passionate about certain ideas, as you've seen. I am very happy that I've been co-editing with my fellow writer in Spain, Lola Robles, Hijas del Futuro, Daughters of the Future, which is it's actually an anthology of essays on feminist science fiction. And we talk not just about Spanish science fiction, but we talk about the fantastic and the marvelous, all the non-realistic genres, and from Latin America and from Africa. So it's very interesting because we focus on many different things, and I'm super excited that is coming just now out in July. And I am also writing a fantascience or science fantasy
Science
story.
fantasy.
Yeah, about a revolution. Because I think we need more revolutions. And not all revolutions have to be, violent and maybe some violence is needed, or some affirmative actions. But I think revolutions are important, and we have to write more about those. Why not? So let's stay tuned for this one.
Francesco.
Well, I've just very happy to say that my story, Ecoficción, I don't know how it's been translated by my friend Cesar Santibáñez, will be published on a Peruvian anthology, and it's a solar punk story. And I want to say that I believe so much in the ecofuturism of female, and of course ecofeminism, that next year I'm going to publish The Bright Mirror, which is an anthology of female writers talking about solar punk. And I would like to include, of course, the Marea Verde of Chris. So we will see. And that's it. And on top of all the other solar punk activities that we organizing, not least, of course, something probably at the FutureCon. We'll see.
Well, with that, thank you to all our guests for joining us. Thank you to everyone who has seen this live and who will see it later on. This has been ALCIFF's talks on ecofuturism and ecofiction. I hope you all had as much fun as I did, and see you all around and read you around, I guess. Thank you again. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much from the bottom of the heart.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you for the moderation.
Hasta pronto.
And the
Gracias, Arturo. Gracias, Chile.
No, thank you.